Perfect. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming to our session today, using your voice, impacting inclusive leadership through colleague written eGuides. I hope everyone's having a fantastic summit. I know I have had a wonderful time. So we will get started if you want to go to the next slide. So I just thought I would do an introduction so you know who you're going to be listening to for the next hour. My name is Gina Hooker. My pronouns are she and her. On the picture, you'll see on the left-hand side, that's my partner and I around Christmas time. On the far right, those are my two dogs, Jax and Pixie. The bottom left is a dragon boat. I'm on a dragon boat racing team. And then on the bottom, that is the Columbia River Gorge, one of my very favorite places in the world. So I wanted to share that photo. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Anita?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anita Gutierrez. I'm with Pride at Sage, Sage Software. So I am an ally, a curriculum developer, traveler. Upper left is my garden. Lower right are my puppies. I'm hoping one of them will make an appearance today. In the top right, I have a blog. It's called Professionally Queer, where I review books that explain the ROI on investment in DEI from a corporate perspective. So check it out. Love to have guest contributors as well. Let's see. So I also want to take just a minute, since we are the very last slot in the conference, to say thank you all for being here. I know it's late and we're all tired, but I wanted to call out a couple of sessions I thought were just fantastic and that are a little bit related to what we're going to be talking about, helping to educate colleagues within a corporation. So the first one was cross-team success stories, and that was a Planned Parenthood discussion. That was yesterday, but the recording is available. And then also the PFLAG session on LGBTQ plus history in the workplace. Really great session, both of those. So I encourage you, if you missed them, go watch the recording. They're really worth it. Great.
All right. Thank you, Anita. All right. So I just want to go through what we're going to talk about today so you know what to expect. We just got through our introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about support and readiness. So what is it? When do you know that you're ready as an organization to create an LGBTQ plus eGuide? Anita will talk through our process. We'll then go into some key takeaways and recommendations, talk a little bit about measuring success. And then hopefully at the end, I can't promise anything, we'll have some time for questions and response. So go ahead, next slide. Also, just to let folks know, there are some materials on the files tab by our session, and those are available. One's sort of a template for each of the sections that we're going to be talking about today, very high level template, and then a how-to guide. So those are available to download. So why are we here? What's this toolkit about? So go ahead to the next slide. So we created a toolkit consisting of 7 educational eGuides on different aspects of LGBTQ plus diversity and experience. And each of the guides focuses on a particular LGBTQ plus topic at the global level. The purpose was to educate leaders, managers, directors, the C-suite about LGBTQ challenges, needs, barriers to success in the workplace. And we really wanted to address topics with empathy. We wanted to address stories and really appeal to our colleagues' commitment to our corporate value statement that we do the right thing. And then we just want to highlight that while this was designed specifically for leadership, this toolkit is available to all colleagues, and we are encouraging leaders to share and cascade with their teams. Next slide, please. So support and readiness. Is your organization ready? This is something we really had to think about and talk through before we jumped in. I was the global Pride at Sage ERG lead. So we really needed to sort of talk through, as with all of the global ERGs, if we felt like we were ready as an organization. And the answer was yes. So what we needed to do, though, was really gauge the current state of our colleagues' familiarity with an acceptance and engagement of LGBTQ plus colleagues and partners. And we can do this right by employee voice or engagement surveys, gathering feedback from the LGBTQ plus ERGs, hiring a consultant to assess your organization's readiness, but just really make sure you have that foundation set. And the next one, we'll talk about this a couple of different times, is that the key is really to gain buy-in and support from executive leadership. And then a question you might be asking yourselves is, well, why don't we just have someone create this for us, right? Developing a toolkit in-house sends the message to that LGBTQ plus issues are important, and that your executive leaders want colleagues to hear directly from you, from your voice. And it also lets you tailor it directly or specifically to your organization. Next slide, please. So getting started, there's really three pillars that we want to highlight here. The first is that top-down commitment that I spoke about a moment ago. So you really need your leadership team to be committed to LGBTQ plus diversity, equity, and inclusion. The eGuides touch on a lot of areas that are often not discussed or accepted in the workplace. We talk about sexual orientation, gender identity, and issues of discrimination. So your executive leaders need to be on board with the importance of addressing those topics with colleagues. The second one is strategic alignment. So the toolkit really needs to fit into a larger strategy. It shouldn't be a one-off. So your larger DEI strategy and supported by your LGBTQ plus ERG. And there needs to be a broader groundwork established prior to rolling out any resource like this. Again, we want it to be really rooted and embedded and not something that's just sort of out there and gathers dust. And then the third thing is bandwidth. This is more granular, but just really understanding that there is a lot of work. There's a lot of emotional labor that goes into something like this. There's a lot of off the side of your desk work. So you need to have at least one or two colleagues and maybe more who can invest really time and energy to develop the toolkit. And however many of those content contributors you have, they should really have the skills to organize a lot of information, use a common voice, and present in a compassionate and non-judgmental manner to others who might lack experience in the area. Next slide, please. So we've talked a couple of times about leadership commitment. So I just wanted to end my section with a quote from Priya Chandra Rogers, our Global Talent Director, as a way to just sort of model that. She says, as an ally and as a leader, I see my role as supporting others, holding each other to account and working toward change. We do not always need to have the answers, but we should be willing to learn. This eGuide will support you as a leader. Think about how to more intentionally bring inclusive practice into your approach with our LGBTQ plus colleagues. All right, Anita, with that, I will send it over to you.
Thank you, Gina. All right, so I'm going to spend some time talking about how we went through this process. This slide is pretty, these are pretty standard phases that any process will go through, not just LGBTQ toolkits, but I'll use this as a framework for talking about the specific issues that we ran into with these eGuides in particular. Before I get into that, I'm going to give you a sneak preview of the guide so that you have that to kind of keep in mind as we talk about how we got there. So we produced a series of 7 guides. So when we say toolkit, we mean this collection of 7 eGuides. So each of these documents is an eGuide. And I have them all together in one document here for the purpose of talking about different elements of them, but I'll just kind of go through one by one at a high level what each one was. So the first one was very introductory, diversity, leadership, and your team. It called out definitions that are really like people might not know, they might be embarrassed that they don't know, be afraid to ask. So we started with the real basics. What's diversity? What's equity? What's inclusion? And then we also had a page that offers these introductory definitions of the letters LGBTQ+. And we also expanded on the plus a little bit on the next page by describing some of the groups that fall under that. Again, these are really elementary definitions. And then as we go through the guides, we definitely added nuance and depth to them so that, we tried to give as full of a picture as we could. So this was the introduction. Number 2 was, so when we think about LGBTQ, there's sexual orientation on one part of it, and then gender identity. We separated those 2 concepts into 2 different eGuides. So the first one is on sexual orientation. What do I need to know about LGBT or LGBTQ colleagues that fall under that umbrella of sexual orientation diversity? Of course, we know that sexual orientation and gender identity exist on a spectrum, and you have to kind of add nuance to both sides of it in order to talk about one. So we had kind of a chicken egg question where, how do we describe sexual orientation when we haven't yet covered the diversities of gender? And how do we cover the diversities of gender when we haven't yet talked about sexual orientation? So in this second guide, we did acknowledge that by saying, L, G, and B don't quite cover it because we're still talking about a binary with those terms. So we will get into gender identity in the next guide, but we kind of laid a foundation for, this is coming. So don't think that it's, all really simple yet, because it's not. So this guide focused on, what are the experiences of people with different sexual orientations, and what are the specific areas that we might want to be aware of in the workplace. The third guide then, of course, was on gender identity and all the nuances of explaining gender. Gender is not just a binary thing anymore. We can really talk about, there are more than two genders. We know that. And so we've tried to go through this material and explain it. With all of the guides, we were trying to be really empathic and not confrontational, like we're here to tell you things, but it was kind of partnering with the reader, saying, we're going to explain these things in a way that is going to make them not scary, not complicated, and it's going to help you be the best leader or colleague that you can be. So that was the goal with all of them. So the gender one, I'm going to come back to each of these as I talk about different concepts. So this intro is, again, a really quick introduction, but let's see if I can get to the next one behind these windows. Okay. So the fourth and fifth guides were about employment specific issues. So attracting and hiring LGBTQ colleagues. How do we network? How do we welcome people to the office? We talked about the bathroom question here. We said, we've all experienced coming to a building and interviewing and needing the restroom because we've had tons of coffee and we're really nervous. So we try to explain that from the perspective of how do you welcome someone who might be transgender or non-binary in the office. So we kind of just took each of the guys takes a particular lens and brings the issues or the challenges to bear so that we can look at it from all these different lenses. Number 5 was engaging and retaining colleagues. So once we've attracted and hired for diversity, how do we retain? How do we engage those colleagues? And this one was really, it's interesting because it's a lot of advice that applies to everyone. But for example, when we say, ask the colleague about their career aspirations and make sure that you're helping them achieve their goals and, find out what it is they're interested in doing long term. That's basically really good advice for any manager or director or leader. But we also know that LGBTQ people tend to feel like opportunities are less open to them, like they're maybe more invisible or not considered for those. So what we're saying here is it needs to be a deliberate process on your part. Don't just assume that you're covering it because you've said things to everybody, like, think about your career aspirations. No, we want to make sure that those colleagues are being really encouraged to thrive and that we want them to succeed and go as far as they want to go in their career with us. We also just pull on the idea that retaining colleagues, once they've been with us for a while, they have that expertise, they have the familiarity, they've brought so much talent to the job. We don't want to lose that. And we especially don't want to lose it for something as avoidable as having them not feel like they can be accepted and valued and bring their authentic selves to work. So we just kind of reinforce a lot of those messages and kind of make it, pretty practical and commonsensical, I hope. So the first 5 guides have to do with specifically with SAGE leadership, with colleagues, with the expectations that we can all bring our authentic selves to work. The final 2 were a little bit different. Number 6 addresses how do you talk to colleagues who might have concerns about LGBTQ plus diversity. So very recently, I heard someone say something along the lines of, I'm really thrilled that my gay and Hispanic and Black colleagues feel included, but now I feel excluded because my issues aren't seen as important. So this was a really challenging guide just in terms of breaking down the kinds of questions or the kinds of assumptions or misinformation that people have, and really patiently saying, okay, someone might have this objection, and here are things you can say. You can remind them that if you're kind of harboring homophobic, transphobic, biphobic views, keeping them to yourself, you might think you're not harming anyone, but actually you are. We've heard these remarks. We know that this is infused into the culture. And when you're speaking, you never know whether someone in the room is going to be LGBTQ plus, not out or not yet out, whatever it happens to be. Don't send the message in the first place that those are not acceptable. That's a standard that we all need to work on and improve. And so this 6th guide really was about helping people with things to say if they end up in those situations. And we tried to give really straightforward, suggestions. Here's a way to kind of take down, lower the temperature of the conversation, present evidence, here are the concerns, just give people tools that they can use in those conversations. So we went through several different kinds of myths in this guide and tried to kind of give people a sense of how they can talk to others about it. The final eGuide was definitely the most challenging in terms of being triggering to write it. We decided that, it's all great to talk about a fully inclusive workplace culture that we can envision and that we want to achieve. But we also have to recognize the reality that there are going to be a lot of colleagues around the world who are not living in anything like a safe environment for them, or a secure, respectful environment, that they cannot bring their authentic selves to their home, let alone their work, and that they're really afraid of that. So we felt like we needed to round out people's information. So we, again, just broke this down into, this is going to be a really hard topic. We gave a warning at the beginning saying this, this could cause you distress. And then we just go through and say, okay, first of all, yeah, there's good news. We have made a lot of progress, and we've also built these really strong bonds with other justice movements, racial justice, AAPI, all different justice movements, that there's been these connections and strengthening and deepening of those ties, and that's great. But we still have a long ways to go. We took an approach to this section where, we kind of broke it down into different areas of rights, and we tried to focus on countries or regions where SAGE has a presence. So as our colleagues read this, they're more likely to say, oh, Morocco, yeah, I know colleagues in Morocco. I know, I deal with them every day, or, places where there are offices, so that people can read it and think, oh my gosh, people are going through this right there. It's so scary. But also, strengthening people's resolve to have an inclusive workspace, no matter what is going on outside of the doors of our workplace. So that's a quick overview of these guides. And so now I'm going to go back to the beginning and kind of talk about our process as we went through them and develop them. So as Gina said, we got to a point in, I think early or mid 2020, when we were talking about, are we ready to do this? And the people in that conversation, I'm going to come to that question in just a second, the people involved in that conversation decided, yeah, I think we're ready. And then they brought that request to the Pride at SAGE organization. So for the, we want to just kind of pause and ask for your thoughts. What are a couple of words that come to mind when you think about creating the eGuides like the ones you just saw? And I realize it was a really quick overview, but we'd love for you to post in chat, what's your reaction so far? What do you think? How would that go over in your company? Do you think your company's ready, or, do you have a ways to go? So if you put those in chat, I'll keep going, but Gina can take a look at those, and in a minute we could call out what are some of the interesting points that we've seen. Okay, so the way we initiated the project, so Gina and I are in Pride at Sage. So the structure is that our global program manager for DEI, Sarah Goff, who's really phenomenal, leads the Sage Belong team and manages several of the ERGs within their purview. Gina is the global lead for Pride at Sage, and Gina works with regional leads across the company. And then those regional leads will work with those of us who are site leads. So I'm a site lead, I'm way down here. I lead the remote colleagues North America group. And that's significant because, well, first of all, because when we started, remote colleague was not everyone, it was just a few of us. But I took on the leadership of that group, and we quickly realized that whereas, our Atlanta office or our Portland office or our, different offices, they're brick and mortar, they have physical presence close by, they can do happy hours, they can do parades, they can do all kinds of cool stuff. As a remote group, we were spread out all over North America. And so we didn't have that same focus, but instead we took on more nerdy or wonky types of things. We reviewed policies, we reviewed intranet sites, we made recommendations based on what we thought the challenges were at that time. And so when Sarah and Gina first decided, okay, we're going to go with this toolkit, it was kind of natural to come to the remote group because that's the kind of stuff we do. So they brought this to us, and as the remote lead, I said, yeah, I am all over that. And I'm sure that some of the colleagues in the remote group were thinking, how much time is this going to be? But we made it, we really made it, tried to make it fair so that people who didn't have the bandwidth to contribute didn't feel like they had to, it was just something we were doing. Everyone was invited to review and participate and do whatever they wanted to contribute. So that was kind of how things got pushed off the dock. So from there, we said, all right, actually, I'm going to jump ahead a little. Sorry about that. I'm going to go back to outline. So from there, we said, all right, what are the topics that we want to really cover? What are the important things? And we had a review cycle where, along with the remote group, we came up with an outline, we took that back to Sarah and Gina, and then we did a little more and we took that back to Sarah and Gina. So it was really a repetitive process, but we were making sure, I should say iterative process of making sure that we were really pushing off in the direction that we wanted things to go. Okay, so once we figured out our big rocks, we had kind of an outline that was similar to the end result that you saw. I'm gonna go here. Then we got into actually creating the content. And as a writer, this is my favorite thing to talk about because we really had lots of different ideas for, what was the best way to present things. And we really, I don't know, it was a lot of fun. But so I'm going to go back into the guides now and just talk through what we did for each of them. Let me go back to the full toolkit. Okay. So as we worked on the content, the first thing we knew was that we wanted the tone to be very compassionate, very empathic, not confrontational, but more, I'm your friend and I'm going to help you understand this stuff. Okay. So in every guide, we had connecting statements such as, as a Sage leader, you already work really hard. You do a great job. We know that your colleagues love working for you because our employee surveys all along show that leaders are very popular. So we know that you're already doing all that. And we think you're probably already committed to the ideas of gender equality, fairness, justice. We're just here to give you some information about LGBTQ plus colleagues that will help you in your job if you encounter specific situations. And so that's the tone that we tried to set for all of them. We're not here to explain you what you're doing wrong. We're here to, be your friend and give you information. And so we start by, explaining, yeah, these concepts can be difficult. Gender is much more nuanced than we think. And as we go through these statements, gender is more nuanced. The sex we're assigned at birth might not always align to our gender identity. Those of us in DEI work are going to be really familiar with those concepts, and we're going to, maybe roll our eyes and go, yeah. But for people experiencing these concepts for the first time, we tried to acknowledge, this could be shocking the first time you think about this, especially if you're really immersed in a culture where the binary is enforced and it's the norm, and people who don't fit the binary are seen as problematic. So we really tried to kind of give people a chance to breathe and to acknowledge, okay, this might be uncomfortable, but we still need to talk about all this stuff. And we explain, why is this important in the workplace? Why is this something you might encounter? We really tried to, make it that type of a guide. So let's see, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay, so the tone was really important. We also felt like we needed to answer questions. So people might have heard certain terms, or they might have a vague idea of what something means, but we wanted to really make it explicit. So coming out, for example, coming out's a process through our whole lives. We have to have conversations with perhaps everyone, family, friends, teachers, healthcare providers, neighbors, on, and it can be really exhausting. I think people often think of coming out as, okay, you tell someone and you're done. No, you're not done. You're just getting started. So that was something that we really tried to portray here. Along with coming out, we said we really need to be sensitive and to people who are not going to come out. They might have circumstances that have nothing to do with the SAGE workplace, that have to do with their families, their cultures, their legal situation, whatever it happens to be. There's going to be a lot of things that people consider when they decide whether to come out. And we need to be aware that our language, our messaging, our habits of inclusion are such that even someone who is thinking they will never ever come out at work or otherwise, that person too is welcome. And we're not going to force them into uncomfortable gender binaries, or into assuming that they have a different sex partner. We're going to try to make this an inclusive space, even for people who don't necessarily ever want to let on, because those people are welcome to, and they need to feel secure and valued at our workplace as well. So then we started thinking, all right, what's the best way to do this really empathically? And we arrived at the idea of case studies. For now, we're looking at the second guide, which is the one about sexual orientation. And so these case studies are not actual real people or colleagues. We took sets of experiences that different people have had and put them together into fictional colleagues. So we're not, there's nothing about, confidentiality risk here, but we gave them sort of realistic and believable stories. And we started with a colleague, or a case study for someone named Lucia, who's a heterosexual woman who has great performance. She's been with a company a long time, and she hits a rough patch where her husband becomes very ill, critically ill. And then their son also starts acting out and displaying behavioral issues that need to be evaluated. So we just kind of took that story through to its conclusion. And in Lucia's case, she is able to go to her manager and say, this is what's going on. I really need support. I'm definitely going to get all my work done. Here's how I'm going to do it. And she works through that process, that difficult period of time. She's successful, and her husband recovers, and her child gets the help he needs. And so it's a great outcome for her. And then we said, okay, now let's give that same scenario to Jasmine, who is a lesbian colleague who cannot come out because her family is very conservative. She's married to a woman, but she has to refer to her wife as my housemate because nobody is allowed to know that they're married. Her wife has a child, so the two of them are parenting a child. And then the same scenarios strike Jasmine. So her wife becomes ill, the child starts having behavioral issues, and then we kind of follow that through. What are the differences in how her experience of this goes? And the crux of it is that when she talks to her manager and says, my housemate is ill and my housemate's son is having issues, the manager thinks, okay, why is that your problem? It's your housemate. And so we kind of take that through its logical conclusion. Jasmine ends up deciding, even though her wife recovers and the child gets the help that they need, Jasmine decides that she needs to work on this coming out thing before she can, before she finds hits another rough patch and really needs that consideration from work. And so she ends up going to a company that's more inclusive and that can help her get through that without her having to, put herself in danger. So we really try to kind of take scenarios that everyone can relate to. We all know colleagues who've had struggles in their lives, and comparing what is this like for a heterosexual person versus someone who's LGBTQ+. And in the sexual orientation portion, we focused on family relationships and how do we identify those people who are close to us? How do we deal with that? So those are the two for the sexual orientation guide. We did something very similar for the gender identity guide. So we presented 3 different colleagues. One is Carlos, who is a very strong candidate for a job, doesn't have the job yet. He is interviewing and talking to the manager, and the manager says, hey, you're a great candidate. Can I have your references? At which point Carlos says, I might need to tell you that my references actually know me as Elena. And we wanted to model at that moment what a really awesome response would be from a manager. So we have the manager say, thanks for telling me, we welcome you. And we have a great DEI program. We want to make sure that your journey here is as complete and fulfilling as it possibly can be. And so that's a really great response. No issues there. We then contrasted that to another colleague named Alden. Alden is also interviewing for a job, and Alden is gender fluid. They decide that they will present at the interview and then later their first day on the job as male to kind of set aside that discussion, to not have it be a factor in the interview process. So they are successful, they get the job, and on the first day of work, they talk to their manager, and the manager is not awesome about it. The manager is uncomfortable, doesn't understand anything about non-binary or gender fluid, and the manager is kind of dismissive of it. But even worse, she then appears to tell other people on the team without Alden's permission. So from day one, Alden is having a very awkward and uncomfortable job experience and not feeling included at all, feeling somewhat ostracized. And that's exactly what we need to avoid. And so as we're talking about this case study, we take the opportunity to say, Alden is an upstanding person, has all the skills, has everything that earned them the job, and we need to treat that person with respect, no matter what we understand or don't understand about their identity. Us understanding it is not what makes a person deserving of respect. So we tried to convey that as well as we could in this. And then our third colleague, let's see, Fiona. Our third case study was Fiona. Fiona has been with the company for a very long time, is very well respected, has mentored other entry-level people, has been really popular with people all along, but Fiona's colleagues know her as Frederick. And so before transitioning, Fiona talks to her manager about the fact that she's going to transition to Fiona. And again, we had a manager who had a really great response, one who isn't savvy about the issues, but still was able to say, this is awesome. I'm going to go learn what I need to, and I will support you however I need to. kind of, I don't know what I can, what to do at this moment, but I will figure it out, because it's really the manager's job to remove barriers and to learn what is needed to support that colleague. So, kind of set that manager on the track to become more educated. But in the meantime, he can still show great support. And so that's then Fiona's situation is going to bring challenges, because all of these colleagues that have worked with her for a long time, known her and really benefited from her, they're going to go on this journey with her. They're going to see her transition, and the expectation is they'll be really supportive, and they'll have a much deeper understanding of gender and of their new colleague, their existing but newly transformed colleague, and that she can be really successful that way, and that especially someone like that, we would want to keep them at Sage. I think we have a line when she tells her manager that she's going to transition. The manager had detected her nervousness and was afraid that she was going to leave. And so when she says, I'm going to transition to Fiona, he's like, oh, well, that's a relief. That's great. As we would want to value someone. So the writing really, we really wanted to illustrate these with as much interest and empathy as we could. And then the final sort of area that we really wanted to enforce throughout the guides was that for each of the concepts that we introduced, for each of the different areas that we're describing, we try to include calls to action. So at the end of every guide, we have a page like this one. How can I better support the colleagues that I've just been reading about? How can I learn more about these issues? And we include that for in the gender identity guide, as well as in the sexual orientation guide. And then even in the later eGuides that talk about colleagues with concerns or with rights around the world, we try to have really concrete calls to action. Here are things you can do. Stay safe, take care of yourself, but also educate yourself and learn about the issues, and think about them with the new information that you have here, and that go forward and help everyone thrive within. So that's basically the writing process, the areas I wanted to call out in terms of how we approach that. Of course, review is going to be a really important area to think about once we start generating all this content. So for reviewing, we started, of course, by having Sarah and Gina and I review them really closely and make sure that, and we also had people in the remote team review to make sure that the wording was authentically coming from us, that it was really expressing the concepts with sufficient nuance and depth, and that we weren't, that we really were enforcing the information and doing it in an empathic way. Once we were satisfied with that content, we also started identifying areas where we might want others to review. If not all of the guides, then at least certain targeted reviews. So for example, we had our talent acquisition team review the hiring guides to make sure that we were describing practices that aligned with what they actually do. So that was, we actually had a really great conversation come out of that, because I got on, on a call with the talent acquisition person who was reviewing, and one example of what we talked about was I had an example in there of saying that when we try to hire someone, we do not disqualify people for a mismatch between of their gender marker or their name on ID documents versus how they present. And she had actually not been aware that that was actually something that ever happened. She hadn't thought about it. And she said, why are you talking about the ID thing? And I said, because this is a thing. It's, this happens to people, that when their documents don't match how they're presenting, that some companies will disqualify them at that moment from being hired. And she said, well, okay, great, because we don't check on that anyway. But we need to make sure that we don't, so that we're not unjustly discriminating. So or discriminating at all. So some really great conversations came out of the review process where we brought in people from different disciplines in the company and, said, what's your take on this? And they would say, well, why are you saying this? And then we would be able to help educate them right there. There's so much here. I've been involved in advocacy for like 30 years, and I learned a tremendous amount just from the research and reactions from different team members. So I know that as our leaders reviewed and other people reviewed them, it became an opportunity for all of us to learn more. And it was really exciting in that respect. Let's see.
Anita, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to do a quick time check.
Sure. Okay.
15.
Right. Okay. So I am going to keep going then, and I will probably, I'm almost done actually. So we talked about reviewing. We had several different people review different areas. For example, we had our facilities manager review. We had our communications team definitely review number 6, which is the one on colleague concerns, because we were touching on some really sensitive areas, such as, when people have conflicts stemming from their religious beliefs or from a question of morality, we need to be respectful to all of those colleagues, not just LGBTQ. We're not telling people they have to change their beliefs. So we had people review all of that. I think the mantra for us was we didn't want any leaders to be surprised when we launched these. We didn't want anyone to say, oh, I didn't know you were going to talk about this. We wanted everyone to have the opportunity to review who would be in that situation and might be taken by surprise. So we did a lot of work with that. The next area I want to talk about was branding, and really we knew from the beginning that the branding team was going to take our copy and our ideas and put it into their templates. And what we didn't know was how challenging that was going to be. They put things into their templates, and we went back and forth several times on things like fonts and readability and layout and all that. But then we especially had challenges when it came to choosing the photos. From the very beginning, when we started writing, we kind of knew, this is a whole experience. It's not just the text. So right away, we started looking for photos that were going to really do the work of making LGBTQ familiar, beautiful, recognizable, really just support everything that we were saying in our narrative. And so by the time we were done writing, we also had, I don't know, close to 100 different photos that we had identified that would be really great. So, and then throughout the guides, we had different applications of photos. So for example, the title pages, we always wanted to have a really compelling photo on the title page. And we chose photos that were really going to illustrate that, the topic of that guide as well as we could. In number 7, in particular, we had, okay, now it's not loading, but we had this beautiful photo of the Pride flag. There we go. Which I just love this. It always makes me happy when I look at it. But we felt like for a guide that's going to be somber and talk about rights and advocacy, we wanted this symbol of hope here. So going back to here, on each content page, we tried to have at least 1 or 2 photos that, again, were just illustrating, as we went along. We also were interested in pages like this using pull quotes. So we would pull something from the text that we felt was particularly compelling or important. And we found a photo that fit with it really well, and wanted to present those throughout as almost like a relief from the pages of lots of text. We wanted to have, here you can skim and you can see what we're talking about just from these pages like this. One of the areas that got kind of interesting working with branding was that there were photos we identified that were more somber. So for example, not coming out, this is not necessarily a topic that is happy and joyous, and we didn't want to portray it as such. One of the interesting challenges we had with the branding team was that their guidelines say that Sage's brand is all about people looking happy and smiling. And for whatever reason, we were having a big disconnect about that when we chose some of these more somber photos. it was because they were going to be in the background for some sobering facts or things that we were illustrating. And so on a page like this, for example, initially they would come back with these smiling people because Sage's brand is to smile. And we finally had to go to them and say, so is Sage's brand to smile while discussing human rights violations? Because that's what you're doing. And so we were able to, get to a place of understanding with them, and they did finally, get it. And we're able to see that pages like this really required a different sort of feeling than just the happy people that they were accustomed to. The other way that we got around that a lot was that we had photos that weren't people. We just showed, again, the pride flag in different settings. So, or we had several like this that were just a very strong symbolism against a dark background. So it kind of gave you a more bracing feel to illustrate. So we had several like this that were just kind of calling out, the symbolism. Whoops, sorry. I don't know where that went. There we go. The symbolism. So let's see. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then I will turn it back over to Gina, is that when we launched these, we set up a dedicated intranet page. And so this page introduces what the toolkits are, and then each of these green boxes is one of the guides. We had a leader from around the company write an introduction to the guides. So basically saying, here's why you should read this guide and benefit from it. And this is a place where people can come and self-serve as needed. So yeah, so I'm going to let Gina take over and talk about, let's see, I'm going to jump forward a bit to where we are, sorry. And we'll present this second question, which are, I think what we've struggled with is how to keep the ideas or the content fresh as we are coming up almost a year or several months later. I'm going to let Gina take over, and we can talk more about this question in terms of what she has to say about the learnings.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anita. So first of all, I just want to give a shout out to everyone in chat. Thank you so much for your participation, seeing a lot of encouraging things. People are ready. People want to do this. I think the biggest challenge that folks are saying they're going to have is the resourcing, because we're doing this off the side of our desk in our free time, or what I've heard this week, which I love, is as part of our gay job. So yeah, so I just wanted to acknowledge that and thanks folks for being part of the chat. So I did want to talk about some key takeaways, maybe save some of you a couple of hangups that we had. So if you can go to the next slide, Anita.
Oops. Sorry about that. Okay.
All right, go ahead and go one more. So there were sort of three things that were the biggest for us that we wanted to impart to you all. The first part is for a tip for success is the amplifying piece. And Anita talked about this, we mentioned it a couple of times, but just to really ensure that your voice, the voice of your ERG doesn't get subsumed into the corporate comms voice. And this was super critical, that it was written by Pride at Sage, and the audience needed to know and feel that authenticity when reading it. The second one is timing. So we ended up launching them all at one time, and we would recommend not doing that and recommend launching them at different times, maybe phasing them out, and maybe holding lunch and learns or Q&A sessions, discussion panels, some way to sort of engage with them as well, so that it doesn't seem overwhelming for folks, or it sort of gets posted and then people forget about it, or there's no sort of way to have that discussion or open that dialogue. So definitely think about phasing them when you're launching them. And then the third thing is what Anita just alluded to, which is planning how you will continue to tie these available resources into your existing DEI programs or ERG goals on an ongoing basis. How can we keep them fresh? How can we keep them alive? How can we, continue to remind folks that these resources are out there and available, and to get people to engage? And so I think that's just something to keep top of mind, so that, again, like I said at the beginning, this isn't a one and done sort of thing, and that it maintains impact for the long term. All right, next slide, please, Anita. All right, and then measuring success. I am sorry to inform you that I do not have the magic wand. I do not have all the answers for this. This is sometimes one of the trickier things to do, but I wanted to give you some idea of how we're measuring success of these eGuides. Anita, can you go to the next slide, please? I might have lost Anita. I saw her photo go away. So I can just talk through it. Oh, there we are. So we are measuring short-term and long-term impact. The first one is really around on the short-term side, really around engagement. So the number of visits to the internet page, which hosts the eGuides that Anita just showed you, the number of views, etc. We're looking at clarity. So do we have a lot of questions? Are there a lot of queries around the eGuides? This is a tough one to correlate, but is there an increase in membership? Is there more engagement with our Pride ERG? Are there more people wanting to join, or more people showing interest or being involved? And then leadership, of course, the number of times our leaders have signposted to these resources during all hands meetings, during, we have Sage Live TV calls, those kinds of things. Are they being talked about among our leadership? And then on the medium to long-term side, just around feedback, so sentiment of feedback on the eGuides, doing some data analysis there, looking at the increase in the number of colleagues that share their sexual orientation and gender identity through self-ID, potentially looking at hopefully a decrease in LGBTQ plus related queries or complaints to HR, and then also looking at an increase in positive colleague sentiment related to DEI and LGBTQ plus inclusion on employee engagement surveys. And then finally, and I think, one of the main goals is, making sure that we have an increase in leadership confidence on supporting LGBTQ plus colleagues, and from survey data showing that kind of sentiment as well. And then also maybe an increase in leadership around reverse mentoring. So again, we don't have the magic sauce for measuring the impact of these, but definitely some data points you can look at to see if your work is having an impact. All right, next slide. That's it. So we actually do have some time for questions, which makes me super happy. So I'm just going to shout out a couple that are in chat, and Anita, you and I can decide who wants to take those. One question, which I think might be a good one for you, is sort of what's the benefit of doing something like an eGuide, and this might put you on the spot, of an eGuide versus a training module?
Well, as a professional trainer, it's a great question. We simply didn't have the bandwidth to launch a training module. I think we were kind of still sorting out what kind of content there would be. And so we took the approach of doing these eGuides partly because we didn't know how we would be able to roll out a training module in the short term. I think we are now thinking about ways that we can use the guides as a basis for educating different teams, taking them to different areas of the company and saying, here they are, and here's what you can do with them. But we did want to have them out there for people to go and self-serve when they had the time or the need. So I hope that answers it.
Yeah, and I think I'll just piggyback on that as well. I think that coupled with sort of that lesson learned that I mentioned around having time for discussion, for Q&As, for lunch and learns, potentially that sort of packages it and allows for deeper dialogue and deeper understanding. Whereas I don't necessarily think that, it depends on how you package a training module, but that might not happen with a training module. People sort of just go through the sort of training that folks go through and don't have the opportunity for that deeper connection. Another question is around length. So I tried to answer this in chat. They asked what's the recommended length, and I said in chat we try to keep them to no longer than 10 pages. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, in the process of taking them into the final format and adding all those photos, and they ended up being lots and lots of pages, but the text was spread out over them. So Yeah, I think when we were actually writing just the Word docs, and I apologize if you can hear the puppy in the background. I actually can't hear him because I've got my headphones in, so I hope it wasn't too distracting. So for the length, yeah, we were aware that our guides were pretty long and that it was going to take a time commitment for people to read them. But we also felt like that, there are some things that can't be said in brief paragraphs. They really, there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of information to portray, and we just needed to do that. So yeah, I would say maybe 10 pages is the maximum for when we just had them in a format in Word. And then of course they blew up when we started adding all the photos.
Great, thank you. Another question is, did you rely on external sources as a foundation to creating your toolkit? I love the idea of showcasing bias through case studies. Well done.
Thanks. I saw a couple of questions in chat actually about the expert and resource question. I did a lot of research just kind of online and getting books, and I kind of already had a foundation in areas that I'd read about already, but in terms of presenting the information, yeah, I wanted to make sure that it was accurate and well presented and as kind of non-controversial as such topics can be. So I did spend a lot of time, on Google looking for information, and also Gina and Sarah and other people in the remote team were just really phenomenal with, giving me links and suggestions for books and stuff. So yeah. Something else we did originally when we were writing them, the end of each guide had a list of resources. And what we ended up doing in the final launch was separate all those out so people can go to just the resources, the lists of books and movies and things that we recommended that might fill in some gaps.
Thank you, Anita. Mm-hmm. There's another question. I think there's pathable chat happening as well that I haven't been monitoring, so I apologize if I'm missing folks. It says, you mentioned you did this on your free time. Is your company doing anything now to promote, uphold, update, etc., any of these guides and make it part of people's day jobs instead of just their gay jobs? Mm-hmm. And I can answer that. And I would say, yes. I mean, I think I'm understanding the question to be, so I guess I don't understand the question.
Go ahead. Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So as far as one of the things that we have a challenge with anyway at our company is, we'll put documents out there, we'll put things out there on the internet and we'll launch it. But then 6 months later, we know there's been turnover and we don't go back and say, hey, here's a reminder that these resources are here. So we have been talking more about, how do we make this how do we refresh it? So for example, for upcoming Pride Month, we might relaunch them again and say, hey, these are still out there. Or if you're new to the company, guess what? You have this resource. So going for that. There's a couple other ways that we've been trying to help people engage too. One, in our goals that we set for all colleagues every year, there's always a professional development element of that. And we've actually suggested that managers can recommend that reading the toolkit is actually one milestone in their professional development, that becoming more educated about these issues is time worth spending, and that we want to give people credit for having done that, as far as annual performance. And then, yeah, we've also just talked about, what are some ways that we can make it fresh again in the, in the next year or ongoing.
Yeah, and I know that I've seen links to it in leadership briefings and those kinds of things as well. So definitely something that is a journey, and we're definitely working on ensuring that it becomes embedded over time. And I think we are out of time. So sorry for those of you that we didn't get to your questions, but thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for everything. Yes,
Gina, there's one question I want to take 30 seconds to answer. Sure. One is that we did this on it says you mentioned that you did this on your free time. No, this was part of our, I incorporated this into my job responsibilities. Yes. It wasn't free time. Yeah.
It was part of our ERG work as part of our, so we're off the side of our desk.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, thank you all so much.
Yeah.
Everyone have a great rest of your summit, and thank you again.